Little girl revives after fatal accident and shares a message from God. Her words leave the community in tears. Breaking news flashed across the local station. 9-year-old girl declared dead for 17 minutes miraculously revives with a message from heaven, but that barely scratched the surface of what truly happened on that fateful morning in the quiet town of Millbrook, Maine. Blood stained the rain-soaked asphalt where Sarah Williams' small bicycle lay mangled. The screech of ambulance sirens pierced the autumn air as a desperate mother clutched her daughter's lifeless hand. "Please God," Jennifer Williams whispered through tears, "don't take my baby." She didn't know then that this tragedy would unlock a divine mystery that would shake their community to its core. Dr. Marcus Thompson later testified that in his 20 years of emergency medicine, he'd never witnessed anything like it. Because when little Sarah opened her eyes after being pronounced dead, she didn't just return to life, she returned with a message that would expose the darkness lurking beneath their town's pristine surface and reveal the extraordinary power of love and forgiveness. This is Sarah's story, a tale of death and rebirth, corruption and redemption, and a little girl's journey from heaven that would change everything. Before diving into this moving story, take a moment to share where you're watching from and hit the like button. Your engagement helps spread this powerful message of faith and love. In the weathered 3-room apartment above Miller's hardware store, 9-year-old Sarah Williams knelt beside her bed each night, hands clasped in prayer. "Dear God," she whispered, "please watch over Mommy and Daddy in heaven." The soft glow of the street lamp outside cast shadows on the wall, illuminating the only photo of her father, a handsome man in Army fatigues, who had died 3 years ago in a training accident, leaving behind a devastated wife and a 6-year-old daughter with his bright blue eyes. Jennifer Williams worked as a cleaning staff member at St. Mary's Hospital, taking extra night shifts whenever possible to make ends meet. At 34, her once vibrant face showed the strain of raising a child alone, but her determination never wavered. Each morning she woke at dawn to prepare Sarah's lunch, usually peanut butter sandwiches with a handwritten note tucked inside before heading to her first shift. Despite their struggles, Sarah remained an exceptionally bright and compassionate child. Her teachers at Millbrook Elementary often remarked how she would share her lunch with classmates who forgot theirs or comfort younger students who were crying. During recess, while other children played tag, Sarah could often be found reading to Tommy Parker, a boy with cerebral palsy whom many kids avoided. The Williams women attended Sunday services at First Baptist Church without fail. Even when Jennifer worked Saturday nights, she would drag her exhausted body into the third pew from the back, where Sarah would lean against her shoulder during Pastor David Miller's sermons. The congregation had helped them through John Williams' death, bringing casseroles and offering prayers, but as months turned to years, the casseroles stopped coming, and the prayers grew quieter. What never diminished was Sarah's faith. She volunteered to help Mrs. Peterson, the elderly church organist, arrange hymn books before service. During Sunday school, she asked questions that made her teachers pause, questions about heaven, about God's plan, about why good people suffered. Sarah has an old soul, Pastor Miller would say, smiling warmly at the little girl who seemed to understand more about faith than many of his adult parishioners. At home, Sarah kept a blessing jar, an old mason jar, where she dropped notes about good things that happened each day. Even on the hardest days, when Jennifer came home too tired to cook and they ate cereal for dinner, Sarah would write something, "Mommy smile, pretty sunset." Found a penny heads up on particularly difficult nights, Jennifer would read through these notes, drawing strength from her daughter's unwavering ability to find light in the darkness. Their financial situation had grown more precarious in recent months. The hospital was cutting back on staff hours, and Jennifer's ancient car needed repairs they couldn't afford. Sarah overheard her mother on the phone with the bank, voice trembling as she asked for another extension on their loan payment. That night, Sarah emptied her piggy bank, $23.47 saved from birthday money and small chores, and left it on her mother's pillow with a note, "God says everything will be okay." What made Sarah extraordinary wasn't just her generosity or her faith, it was her ability to see beyond the surface of people's actions to their hearts. When Bobby Thompson pushed her down on the playground and tore her only good dress, she later told her furious mother, "He's sad because his parents are fighting. He needs prayers, not punishment." The next day, she shared her cookies with Bobby at lunch. Few people in Millbrook knew that Sarah often spent her afternoons in the hospital chapel while waiting for her mother's shift to end. There, in the quiet space that smelled of old wood and candle wax, she would have long conversations with God, speaking as naturally as if chatting with a friend. The hospital chaplain, Father Michael, would sometimes find her there, this small figure with weak-colored braids, radiating a peace that seemed far beyond her years. No one could have predicted that this unassuming child, who wore second-hand clothes and lived above a hardware store, would become the vessel for a message that would transform their community. But God, as Sarah would later say, doesn't choose us for who we are, He chooses us for who we can help others become. Millbrook, Maine, with its white steepled churches and maple-lined streets, wore its prosperity like a carefully pressed Sunday suit. The town square, anchored by a Civil War monument and surrounded by brick boutiques, projected an image of Norman Rockwell perfection. But beneath this polished surface, invisible fault lines ran deep, dividing the community as surely as the train tracks that split the town between east and west. On the east side stood the newly constructed Millbrook Heights, where Mayor Richard Anderson's three-story colonial commanded the best view of the valley. Here, perfectly manicured lawns surrounded homes owned by the town's elite doctors from St. Mary's Hospital, executives from the paper mill, and the Anderson family who had controlled local politics for 3 generations. The mayor's son, Michael Anderson Jr., fresh from law school, drove his BMW through town with the entitled confidence of someone who had never heard the word no. The west side told a different story. Here, modest homes needed paint, and children played in yards where garden gnomes concealed patches of dead grass. The closure of the textile factory 5 years ago had left many families struggling, their American dream deferred by minimum wage jobs and mounting bills. This was where Sarah and Jennifer Williams made their home, along with most of the hospital's support staff, mill workers, and small business owners barely keeping their heads above water. First Baptist Church stood precisely on the dividing line between East and West Millbrook, its doors theoretically open to all. Yet even here, the invisible lines persisted. The East Side families occupied the front pews, their substantial donations acknowledged on brass plaques and stained glass dedications. West Side families filled the back, their offerings more modest but their prayers no less fervent. Mayor Anderson's influence extended far beyond City Hall. His family's name appeared on half the businesses in town, and his signature graced the permits and contracts that determined Millbrook's future. The local newspaper, the Millbrook Herald, rarely printed anything without considering how the Anderson family might react. When questions arose about missing funds from the town's development project, the story disappeared faster than morning dew. The hospital where Jennifer worked was experiencing its own quiet crisis. Rumors circulated about potential buyouts and budget cuts, while administrative offices were renovated with Italian marble. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the emergency room chief, had raised concerns about staffing shortages, only to find her department's budget mysteriously reduced. The cleaning staff, including Jennifer, had their hours cut, while the hospital hired expensive consultants to improve operational efficiency. Yet Millbrook's problems ran deeper than economics. The opioid crisis that ravaged rural Maine hadn't spared their town, though such matters weren't discussed in polite company. The police chief, a longtime friend of Mayor Anderson, focused on giving speeding tickets to out-of-towners while turning a blind eye to the pills exchanged behind the old mill. Meanwhile, the waitlist for addiction treatment at St. Mary's grew longer each month. The town's young people felt the weight of these unspoken tensions. The high school's college acceptance board showcased East Side students heading to prestigious universities, while West Side graduates more often found themselves enrolling in the military or taking jobs at the paper mill. Michael Anderson Jr.'s recent promotion to junior partner at his father's law firm was front-page news, while the academic scholarship won by Jennifer Williams' niece merited only a small mention on page 6. Father Michael, who divided his time between the hospital chapel and St. Catherine's Catholic Church, often reflected on how Millbrook embodied both the best and worst of small-town America. He witnessed incredible acts of kindness, neighbors helping neighbors, fundraisers for sick children, community dinners where all were welcome, but he also saw the subtle ways privilege preserved itself, how power protected power, and how truth often bowed to influence. What Millbrook needed, he thought, was something to shatter these invisible walls, something to remind them of their common humanity. But who could have guessed that this awakening would come through a 9-year-old girl, and that it would begin with a tragedy that would force the town to confront not just its social divisions, but its very soul. October mornings in Maine carried the first sharp bite of winter, and this particular Tuesday dawned with frost crystallizing on fallen leaves. Sarah Williams pedaled her second-hand bicycle along Cedar Street, her backpack heavy with books and a science project she'd stayed up late to finish, a model of the solar system made from painted styrofoam balls and wire. The crossing guard at Maple Junction was out sick that day. Sarah waited patiently at the red light, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. She wore the warm mittens Mrs. Peterson from church had knitted for her birthday, and her father's old scarf wrapped twice around her neck. Jennifer had left early for her hospital shift, kissing her daughter goodbye with their usual morning prayer, "Angels watch over you, sweetheart." The light turned green. Sarah pushed off, carefully balancing her project in the bicycle basket. Later, witnesses would describe how the black BMW came out of nowhere, moving at nearly twice the speed limit. Michael Anderson Jr. was looking down at his phone, responding to an urgent email from his father about a property development deal. He never saw the little girl on the blue bicycle. The impact sent Sarah flying through the air like a rag doll. Her solar system scattered across the intersection, Jupiter rolling toward the gutter, Saturn's rings crushed under screeching tires. The sound of the collision brought people running from Joe's Diner and the pharmacy. Michael's car swerved, hesitated for a fraction of a second, then accelerated away, leaving only skid marks and broken glass behind. Mrs. Baker from the flower shop was the first to reach Sarah. The child lay motionless, her wheat-colored braids stained red against the asphalt. Someone called 911 while Mr. Thompson from the hardware store ran to get his first aid kit. A small crowd gathered, their shocked whispers mixing with distant sirens. "It was the mayor's son," someone said. "I recognized the car drove away like a coward," another voice added. Time seemed to move in slow motion. Officer James Parker, who had coached Sarah's softball team last summer, arrived first. His hands shook as he checked for a pulse. Sarah's science teacher, Ms. Roberts, happened to be driving by. She stopped to help and recognized her student's favorite unicorn lunchbox among the debris. She picked it up, clutching it to her chest as she began to sob. The ambulance arrived within minutes, though to the gathering crowd it felt like hours. The paramedics worked with swift efficiency, stabilizing Sarah's neck, checking vital signs, starting an IV. Through it all, Sarah never moved, never opened her eyes. Her mittened hand hung limp off the stretcher, the loose yarn trailing like a goodbye wave. News traveled fast in Millbrook. By the time the ambulance reached St. Mary's Hospital, Jennifer had already been notified. She ran from the cleaning supply closet, still wearing her uniform, her face white with terror. In the emergency room, she recognized many of the nurses and doctors, people she cleaned up after every day, now working desperately to save her daughter's life. Back at the accident scene, Officer Parker photographed the skid marks and collected fragments of broken headlight. A single BMW logo lay in the gutter next to Sarah's shattered model of Mars. He bagged it as evidence, his jaw tight with anger. He knew the political pressure that would come, knew how these things usually played out in Millbrook. But this time was different. This was Sarah, who had baked cookies for the police station bake sale, who walked his elderly mother home from church every Sunday. Within an hour, Mayor Anderson was already making calls. The hospital administrator received a message about the importance of managing information appropriately. The police chief was reminded about upcoming budget reviews. The editor of the Millbrook Herald was invited to an urgent lunch meeting. But something unexpected was happening in Millbrook. People began gathering at the accident site, students from Sarah's class, parents, teachers, church members. They brought candles and flowers. Ms. Roberts organized her students to salvage pieces of Sarah's science project, carefully collecting each broken planet. Father Michael arrived to lead a prayer circle, his voice steady even as tears ran down his face. In the growing crowd, someone whispered, "This time they've gone too far." The autumn wind carried the words away. But the sentiment remained, growing stronger with each passing minute. In St. Mary's Hospital, machines beeped steadily as doctors fought to save Sarah's life, unaware that this accident would become more than a tragedy. It would become the catalyst that would expose the rot at Millbrook's core and ultimately lead to its redemption. In the sterile brightness of St. Mary's emergency room, Dr. Elizabeth Chen barked orders with the precision of a battlefield commander. Sarah's vital signs were plummeting: blood pressure dangerously low, oxygen levels critical. The girl's small body, already swollen from trauma, seemed impossibly fragile under the harsh hospital lights. Multiple internal injuries, Dr. Chen announced, her voice steady despite the chaos. Possible cerebral hemorrhage. Get or one ready. Jennifer Williams stood pressed against the wall, her cleaning uniform still on, watching as her daughter's life hung by increasingly fragile threads. A kind-faced nurse, Mary Sullivan, who had often shared her lunch breaks with Jennifer, stood beside her, offering silent support. The monitors screamed. Suddenly Sarah's heart was failing. Code blue. The room erupted into controlled chaos as the crash cart arrived. Jennifer's knees buckled as she watched Dr. Chen begin chest compressions on her daughter's tiny chest. 1, 2, 3, 4, the doctor's counting merged with the beeping machines and urgent voices. Clear. The first shock from the defibrillator lifted Sarah's body off the table. Nothing. Again another shock. Still nothing. Jennifer began to pray, her voice barely a whisper. Hail Mary, full of grace. Mary Sullivan joined her, their voices intertwining as the medical team fought against time. Word spread through the hospital. Staff members who knew Jennifer began gathering in the hallway. The custodial team, the cafeteria workers, the reception staff, people who had shared coffee breaks and workplace frustrations with her over the years. They formed a makeshift vigil, their presence a quiet rebellion against the usual hospital hierarchies. 15 minutes passed. Dr. Chen's arms were tiring, but she refused to stop compressions. She had a daughter Sarah's age. She wouldn't let this child die. But after 17 minutes of continuous resuscitation efforts, the brutal truth became unavoidable. Time of death. Dr. Chen began, her voice catching. Jennifer's scream echoed through the emergency room, a sound of such raw anguish that several nurses began to cry. She pushed past everyone to reach her daughter's side, gathering Sarah's limp body in her arms. Please, baby, please, she sobbed. Don't leave me. Don't leave like your daddy did. Father Michael arrived, still wearing his coat, having rushed from the accident site. He began administering last rites, his Latin prayers mixing with Jennifer's desperate pleas. The emergency room staff stood in respectful silence, heads bowed. Even the machines seemed to grow quieter. But then a gasp. At first everyone thought it was Jennifer, but no, it came from Sarah. Color rushed back into her pale face as her eyes flew open, bright and alert as if waking from a deep sleep. The monitors suddenly sprang back to life, showing strong, steady rhythms that should have been impossible. Mommy, Sarah said clearly, her voice filled with joy. I saw Daddy, and I saw God. The room froze. Dr. Chen rushed forward, checking vital signs that now appeared completely normal. There was no sign of the internal bleeding, no indication of the cerebral swelling they'd detected earlier. He said, I have to come back, Sarah continued, seemingly unaware of the medical miracle she represented. He said, I have a message for everyone. She smiled, a smile so full of peace and love that several people in the room later said they felt touched by something divine. News of Sarah's resurrection spread through the hospital like wildfire. Dr. Chen ordered immediate tests, trying to make scientific sense of what she'd just witnessed. The results would later show no medical explanation for Sarah's recovery, no rationalization for how a clinically dead child could return to life with no lasting damage. In the hallway, the gathering crowd had grown. Hospital administrators arrived, drawn by the commotion. They found their carefully maintained professional hierarchy dissolved by wonder. Doctors stood shoulder to shoulder with cleaning staff. Nurses prayed alongside cafeteria workers. All were united in witnessing something that defied their understanding of life and death. Jennifer held her daughter's hand, afraid to let go. Through her tears, she noticed something strange. The old scar on Sarah's knee from a childhood fall had vanished. In fact, her daughter's skin seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. What happened, sweetheart? She asked softly. What did you see? Sarah's answer would shake the foundations of Millbrook's carefully constructed social order. God showed me everything, Mommy, everything that's hidden, and he said it's time for the truth to come out. If this story has touched your heart so far, please consider hitting the like button. Your support helps share this powerful message of faith, miracles, and divine justice with others who might need to hear it today. In the hushed hospital room, Sarah began to describe a journey that would forever change Millbrook. Her voice, usually childlike and bright, now carried an otherworldly calm that made even the skeptical doctors lean in closer. First there was warmth, Sarah said, her blue eyes distant with memory. Like being wrapped in the softest blanket made of pure light, Jennifer held her daughter's hand as Sarah described floating away from the cold hospital room, rising above her own body where doctors fought to save her life. Then I saw Daddy, Sarah continued, tears rolling down her cheeks. John Williams stood before her, not in his military uniform, but dressed in white. He looked exactly as she remembered, but somehow more real, more vibrant. He wasn't sick or hurt anymore. He was smiling, and he told me how proud he was of me and Mommy. The garden she described defied earthly physics. Flowers bloomed with colors that didn't exist in nature, their petals singing soft melodies that felt like pure love. Trees stretched up into forever, their leaves shimmering with golden light. The air itself seemed alive with joy, each breath filling her with understanding beyond words. But then Sarah whispered, I saw him. The room grew even quieter. He was like a father and a friend and a king all at once. His eyes held all the stars, and when he smiled I understood everything: why people suffer, why we're here, why love is the most important thing we have. Sarah described how God showed her visions, glimpses of Millbrook's hidden truths, scenes of corruption and kindness, moments of cruelty and compassion. He showed me Michael Anderson's heart, she said. How scared and lonely he is, even with all his money. He showed me Mayor Anderson's secrets and the pain of those he's hurt. But it wasn't just the powerful who appeared in her visions. She saw the quiet struggles of everyday people: the night janitor who gave half his lunch to homeless teens, the nurse who paid for patients' medications from her own pocket, the teacher who stayed late helping struggling students while her own children waited at home. God, cried Sarah, revealed, her voice breaking. He cried for all of us, for how we hurt each other, for how we forget that we're all his children. Jennifer squeezed her daughter's hand tighter, her own tears falling freely now. The message God gave Sarah was both simple and profound. He said love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice we make every day. He said the truth can't stay buried forever, and that even the smallest light can drive away darkness. Then came the hardest part of her story. God showed me I could stay, Sarah said softly. The garden was so beautiful and Daddy was there, and there was no pain or sadness. She looked at her mother apologetically. Part of me wanted to stay. But God had other plans. He showed Sarah visions of what her death would mean, her mother's devastation, the truth remaining hidden, the powerful continuing to prey on the weak. He told me sometimes the greatest act of love is choosing to return, even when heaven's gates are open. Just before Sarah returned, God gave her a gift. He touched my forehead, she said, and filled me with understanding. Not just about heaven and earth, but about people's hearts. He said this gift would help me complete my mission. As Sarah finished her account, the hospital room remained silent. Dr. Chen, who had entered partway through the story, found her scientific mind struggling with what she'd heard. The brain could create vivid hallucinations during trauma, she knew. But how to explain Sarah's knowledge of things she couldn't possibly know? How to explain the complete healing of her injuries? Father Michael, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up with tears in his eyes. In 30 years of priesthood, he had never heard a near-death experience described with such detail and profound insight. More importantly, he recognized in Sarah's words the pure truth he had dedicated his life to seeking. God said it's time, Sarah concluded, her voice growing stronger. Time for Millbrook to remember what really matters. Time for the truth to come out. Time for love to win. She smiled then, the same smile witnesses would later describe as reflecting heaven's light. None of them knew it yet, but Sarah's divine encounter was about to set in motion a chain of events that would shake Millbrook to its core. The news of Sarah's revival spread through St. Mary's Hospital like a shockwave. Dr. Chen ordered a complete battery of tests: MRIs, CT scans, blood work, all showing results that defied medical explanation. Not only had Sarah's critical injuries vanished, but old ailments had disappeared as well: her childhood asthma, a small heart murmur, even the scar from her appendectomy 3 years ago. It's unprecedented, Dr. Chen explained to a hastily assembled team of specialists. Clinically dead for 17 minutes, yet her brain shows no sign of oxygen deprivation. She spread the before and after scans on the conference room table. It's as if her entire body has been reset. In Sarah's room, a steady stream of visitors arrived despite the hospital's attempts to limit access. Nurses who had known Jennifer for years snuck in during their breaks, drawn by an inexplicable force they couldn't explain. Each person who entered noticed something different. Some claimed the room smelled of roses, others felt an overwhelming sense of peace, and a few swore they saw a soft golden light surrounding Sarah's bed. "The truth will heal us," Sarah told each visitor, her voice carrying a wisdom that made adults shift uncomfortably. She described details about their lives she couldn't possibly know: private struggles, secret acts of kindness, hidden pain. To Nancy Fletcher, a cafeteria worker, she said, "Your son isn't lost. God sees him fighting his addiction, and help will come soon." Nancy burst into tears. She hadn't told anyone about her son's struggles. The hospital administration scrambled to contain the situation. Mayor Anderson himself arrived, his face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We need to manage this carefully," he told the hospital director. Mass hysteria can be dangerous, but when he entered Sarah's room intending to, "What? Silence her? Discredit her?" he found himself frozen by her gentle gaze. "God showed me your heart too, Mr. Anderson," she said softly. "He showed me the little boy who promised to make his father proud no matter the cost. But pride has made you forget what truly matters." The mayor left quickly, his hands shaking as he loosened his tie. By evening, local news vans had gathered outside the hospital. The story was too big to contain. "Miracle at St. Mary's" blazed across headlines. Reporters tried to piece together the narrative: the hit and run, the death, the inexplicable revival. But none of their stories captured the full truth of what was unfolding. Dr. Elizabeth Chen sat alone in her office late that night, reviewing Sarah's case files for the 100th time. As a woman of science, she struggled to reconcile what she had witnessed. But as she stared at the miraculous test results, she remembered something her grandmother in Taiwan used to say: "Sometimes heaven reaches down to touch the earth, and all we can do is bow our heads in wonder." The most remarkable change was in Sarah herself. Though still very much a 9-year-old girl who asked for her stuffed animals and favorite blanket, there was something new in her eyes, a depth of understanding that seemed to look straight through to people's souls. When she spoke of her experience, her words carried an authority that even the most hardened skeptics found difficult to dismiss. Jennifer rarely left her daughter's side, alternating between tears of joy and amazement at the profound wisdom now flowing from her little girl's lips. "God said every person in Millbrook has a part to play in what's coming," Sarah told her mother. "Even Michael Anderson. Especially Michael Anderson." As night fell over Millbrook, the hospital chapel filled with people, doctors still in scrubs, nurses ending their shifts, cleaning staff and administrators kneeling side by side. Father Michael led them in prayer, but found himself struggling for words. How does one thank God for a miracle while preparing for the storm such divine intervention often heralds? In her hospital room, Sarah Williams slept peacefully, untroubled by the commotion her revival had caused. Above her bed, the monitor showed perfect vital signs, while outside her window, a crowd of citizens held a candlelight vigil. Among them stood Officer Parker, still wrestling with his duty as a police officer and his growing conviction that Sarah's miracle would demand justice from all of them. The truth was coming to Millbrook, whether they were ready or not. The morning after Sarah's miracle, Mayor Anderson's office sprang into action with well-practiced efficiency. Phone calls were made, favors called in, and stories carefully crafted. The Millbrook Herald's headline, "Hit and Run Driver Still at Large," appeared below a much larger story about the city's economic growth, with no mention of whose car had been identified at the scene. Police Chief Robert Wallace sat uncomfortably in his leather chair, staring at the evidence bag containing the BMW logo while Mayor Anderson paced his office. "We need to handle this delicately," the mayor said, his voice steady but his fingers drumming nervously on the polished desk. "My son's future is at stake. The Anderson name is at stake. The unspoken threat hung in the air: the chief's pension, his daughter's college scholarship, the new police station funding, all could disappear with a single phone call." At the hospital, Jennifer Williams received an unexpected visit from the hospital administrator, Gregory Phillips. "We're facing budget cuts," he explained, not quite meeting her eyes. "Unfortunately, we'll have to eliminate several cleaning staff positions, including yours." When Jennifer mentioned her 7 years of service and perfect record, Phillips shuffled papers on his desk. It's nothing personal, just business. Officer James Parker found himself suddenly reassigned to traffic duty on the outskirts of town, far from the investigation. When he tried to file his accident report, including witness statements identifying Michael Anderson's car, the computer system mysteriously crashed. The backup files vanished. The skid mark photos disappeared from his phone. Local reporter Rachel Martinez, a recent journalism graduate, tried to pursue the story. She interviewed witnesses, photographed the accident scene, and started connecting the dots. The next day, her editor killed the story. The day after that, she was fired for professional misconduct. Her replacement's first assignment was a glowing profile of Michael Anderson's charitable work. Dr. Elizabeth Chin faced her own pressures. The hospital board suggested her research funding might be reviewed if she continued discussing Sarah's miraculous recovery publicly. Fellow doctors who had witnessed the miracle suddenly became unavailable for comment, their silence bought with promises of promotions or threats of budget cuts. In the hospital's chapel, Father Michael found his usual afternoon prayer service interrupted by two men in expensive suits. They spoke politely about the church's tax status and the importance of maintaining appropriate perspectives on recent events. The priest listened silently, remembering how many of his parishioners relied on Anderson family businesses for their livelihood. Sarah, still in her hospital bed, watched it all unfold with eyes that seemed to see through walls. She told her mother about the midnight meetings, the shredded documents, the whispered threats. God showed me how darkness works, she explained. It doesn't just hurt people, it makes good people hurt other people. The corruption spread like poison through Millbrook's veins. Workers at the accident scene were paid to revise their memories. Security cameras that might have captured the hit and run mysteriously malfunctioned. Even Sarah's school principal suggested she might need extra time to recover before returning to class, time that would conveniently extend past any statute of limitations. But something was different this time. Sarah's miracle had cracked something open in Millbrook's soul. When Jennifer was fired, 3 other cleaning staff members quit in protest. When Rachel Martinez lost her job, she started a blog detailing everything she'd uncovered. When witnesses were pressured to change their stories, they began meeting secretly in basements and back rooms, sharing what they'd seen. Officer Parker, patrolling his empty stretch of highway, used his forced isolation to compile a detailed timeline of the accident and subsequent cover-up. Dr. Chin quietly gathered medical records proving Sarah's supernatural recovery. Father Michael began recording the stories of those who visited Sarah, creating a testament to the miracle that couldn't be erased. The mayor's carefully constructed narrative began showing cracks. People whispered in grocery stores and coffee shops. Someone painted the truth well out on the wall of City Hall. Anonymous letters appeared in mailboxes sharing pieces of the puzzle. The harder the Anderson machine worked to suppress the truth, the more it seemed to seep through the cracks. Sarah watched from her hospital window as the battle lines were drawn. She saw the fear in the eyes of those who visited her, fear of losing jobs, homes, futures. But she also saw something else, a growing light in their hearts, a strengthening resolve. God showed me that truth is like a seed, she told Father Michael. You can bury it, but it only grows stronger in the dark. Mayor Anderson felt his grip on the town slipping. His usual tactics of money and threats weren't working as effectively. People looked away when he passed them on the street. His phone calls went unreturned. Even his oldest allies seemed hesitant to be seen with him. In his darkest moments alone in his office, he remembered Sarah's words about the little boy who wanted to make his father proud, and something inside him trembled. Meanwhile, Michael Anderson Jr. hadn't left his apartment in days. He sat in darkness, drinking expensive scotch, haunted by the image of a little girl's bicycle flying through the air. His father's fixers had cleaned his car, replaced the damaged parts, created a paper trail showing he was elsewhere during the accident. But they couldn't fix the growing crack in his soul, couldn't erase the truth he saw every time he closed his eyes. In the following days, something extraordinary began happening in Millbrook. Despite the mayor's attempts to control the narrative, Sarah's message found its own way of spreading, carried by whispers and transformed lives. Each person who visited her hospital room left changed, carrying not just her words but a tangible sense of divine purpose. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly church organist who had knitted Sarah's mittens, was among the first to speak publicly. During Sunday service, she stood shakily at the pulpit and shared how Sarah had described her secret acts of kindness, how she played hymns in the empty church for lost souls, how she used her pension to help struggling music students. "That child saw into my heart," Mrs. Peterson declared, her voice trembling but clear. "And through her I saw God's love anew." The ripple effect was immediate and profound. Tommy Parker, the boy with cerebral palsy whom Sarah had befriended, began sharing stories of how she had always seen past his disability to his true self. His father, Officer Parker, found his traffic duty post flooded with supporters bringing coffee and sharing their own stories of Sarah's impact on their lives. Dr. Chin organized a secret meeting of medical professionals in her home, documenting Sarah's case with meticulous scientific precision. Nurses, technicians, and doctors testified to what they'd witnessed, not just the physical healing, but the inexplicable way Sarah knew their deepest struggles and offered words of comfort that seemed to come from beyond. The hospital chapel, once sparsely attended, now overflowed at all hours. Father Michael noticed how the usual social barriers dissolved in this sacred space. Bank executives knelt beside janitors, teachers prayed alongside their students' parents, all united by Sarah's message of love and truth. The priests began recording their testimonies, creating a living chronicle of the miracle unfolding in their midst. Sarah's school classmates started a movement of their own. They wore blue ribbons the color of Sarah's eyes and shared stories of her kindness, how she had stood up to bullies, not with anger but with compassion, how she found ways to include every child in games and activities, how she seemed to know exactly who needed a friend each day. Their parents, moved by their children's devotion, began questioning the official narrative of the accident. Even those who had never met Sarah felt her influence. Rachel Martinez's blog gained followers far beyond Millbrook's borders. Her detailed investigations, combined with testimonies from those who visited Sarah, painted a picture not just of corruption but of potential redemption. "This isn't just about exposing wrongdoing," Rachel wrote. "It's about healing our community's soul." The transformation manifested in unexpected ways. The local coffee shop became a hub for sharing stories about Sarah's insights. The owner, Tom Chin, no relation to Dr. Chin, kept a journal of these accounts, noting how specific and personal each message was. "She told me about the letter my mother wrote me before she died," one customer shared. "A letter I'd never shown anyone. She quoted it word for word." Jennifer, though unemployed and facing an uncertain future, found herself surrounded by support. Casseroles appeared on her doorstep. Anonymous envelopes containing grocery money were slipped under her door. A local lawyer offered to represent her pro bono in a wrongful termination suit. The community's love, once dormant, awakened with fierce protective power. Sarah herself continued to radiate an otherworldly peace. Though still a child who giggled at cartoons and asked for bedtime stories, her wisdom touched everyone who entered her room. She spoke of God's love not in abstract terms but in practical, immediate ways. "He wants us to be brave," she would say. "Brave enough to love even when it's hard. Brave enough to forgive even when it hurts. Brave enough to stand for truth, even when we're afraid." The mayor's attempts to discredit her backfired spectacularly. When he suggested she was suffering from trauma-induced delusions, Sarah responded by revealing details about his own childhood trauma, things he'd never told anyone. When his allies tried to paint her family as attention seekers, the community responded with hundreds of stories of Sarah's quiet, unsung acts of kindness from before her accident. By the end of the week, Sarah's message had taken on a life of its own. People reported experiencing strange coincidences and small miracles after visiting her. A recovering addict found strength to stay clean. A couple on the brink of divorce discovered renewed love. A teenager contemplating suicide felt a sudden surge of hope and purpose. Local churches of all denominations began incorporating Sarah's core message into their services, that love is active, truth is unstoppable, and every soul has infinite worth in God's eyes. The First Baptist Church started a Sarah's Light program, encouraging members to perform anonymous acts of kindness and stand up for truth in their daily lives. As Sarah prepared to leave the hospital, Dr. Chen made a final note in her case file: "Patient exhibits unprecedented physical healing coupled with extraordinary spiritual insight. Traditional medical explanation insufficient. personal observation, perhaps some miracles are meant not just to defy science but to transform hearts. The inevitable showdown between truth and power came on a crisp Sunday morning, 2 weeks after Sarah's miracle. Mayor Anderson had organized a town hall meeting at Millbrook High School's auditorium, ostensibly to address recent community concerns. But everyone knew this was his attempt to regain control of the narrative that had slipped so dramatically from his grasp. The auditorium filled beyond capacity. People stood along the walls, sat in the aisles, and crowded the doorways. The social geography of Millbrook had shifted. Bank executives sat beside factory workers, teachers next to their students' parents. Sarah and Jennifer sat in the front row, surrounded by a protective circle of supporters including Dr. Chin, Father Michael, and Officer Parker. Mayor Anderson took the stage with practiced confidence, his expensive suit and practiced Smile armor against the tension in the room. "Friends and neighbors," he began, "we're here to address the unfortunate rumors and speculation that have divided our community." He spoke of Millbrook's prosperity under his leadership, of the dangers of unsubstantiated accusations, of the need for unity and trust in established authorities. Then Sarah stood up. She didn't speak loudly, but her voice carried to every corner of the auditorium. "God showed me something about trust, Mr. Anderson. He showed me that it's like a glass once broken, it can't be fixed with lies." The mayor's practiced smile faltered as Sarah began recounting details of closed-door meetings, of bribes paid and threats made, of documents destroyed in the dark of night. "Your son was texting about the River Heights development deal," Sarah continued, her voice gentle but unflinching. "The message read, 'Don't worry, Dad, the environmental report will disappear by morning.' That's when he hit me. He was driving 57 miles per hour in a 30 zone. His coffee spilled on his white shirt. He looked back once before driving away." The mayor's face drained of color. These were details only his son could have known. From the back of the auditorium, Michael Anderson Jr. stood up, his hands shaking. "She's right," he called out, his voice breaking. "Every word is true," the crowd gasped as the young lawyer stumbled forward, tears streaming down his face. For the next hour, the truth poured out. Sarah revealed not just the accident cover-up, but years of corruption, rigged contracts, embezzled funds, environmental violations, suppressed evidence. She spoke of how the Anderson family had slowly poisoned Millbrook's soul, replacing community trust with fear and favor trading. But Sarah's revelations weren't just about exposing wrongdoing. For every corrupt deed she unveiled, she also revealed an act of quiet resistance: the city clerk who had kept secret copies of incriminating documents, the maintenance worker who had preserved security footage of illegal meetings, the secretary who had recorded years of suspicious transactions. "God showed me that darkness can't survive when light shines on it," Sarah said, now standing on the stage beside the increasingly distraught mayor. "But he also showed me that light comes from all of us, not just from one person." The audience began to stand, one by one, adding their voices to the testimony. Mrs. Baker from the flower shop described how she'd been forced to sell her property for the River Heights development. Officer Parker presented his carefully compiled evidence about the accident. Rachel Martinez shared her digital archive of corruption investigations. Mayor Anderson attempted to regain control, threatening lawsuits and repercussions, but his threats fell flat in the face of Sarah's peaceful presence. When he turned to his usual allies for support, he found them looking away, or in some cases standing to add their own confessions to the growing chorus of truth. The turning point came when Sarah walked over to Michael Anderson Jr., who had collapsed into a chair, sobbing. She took his hand and spoke words that echoed through the silent auditorium. "God doesn't want your punishment. He wants your transformation. Your father taught you that power means never having to say sorry, but true power lies in having the courage to admit when you're wrong." Michael stood, still holding Sarah's hand, and faced the crowd. He confessed everything, not just about the accident, but about years of participating in his father's corrupt schemes. His testimony, broken and raw, carried the unmistakable ring of truth that no amount of polished lies could match. The mayor made one last attempt to salvage his authority, invoking his family's long history of leadership in Millbrook. But Sarah's response silenced him completely. "Your grandfather had a secret motto, Mr. Anderson. He wrote it in his diary on the day he first chose profit over people. Power is the only truth, but he was wrong. Love is the only truth, and love will always find a way to shine." As the meeting dissolved into chaos, people crying, hugging, sharing their own stories of suffering and resistance, Sarah remained calm at the center of the storm. Her mission wasn't just to expose corruption, it was to show how healing becomes possible only when truth is spoken in love. The confrontation marked a point of no return for Millbrook. But as Sarah had promised, it wasn't just an ending, it was also a beginning. The question was no longer whether the truth would come out, but whether the community could embrace the harder task of healing and reconstruction that truth demanded. In the aftermath of the town hall meeting, Michael Anderson Jr. found himself alone in his luxury apartment, surrounded by the trappings of privilege that now felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. The expensive artwork, the leather furniture, the view of Millbrook from his penthouse, all of it seemed to mock him with memories of how it had been acquired. Sarah's words echoed in his mind. God sees the little boy who wished his father would love him more than power. That truth, so simply stated, had cracked open decades of carefully constructed defenses. He spent the night pacing, alternating between waves of crushing guilt and moments of startling clarity, as if seeing his life through new eyes. The turning point came at dawn. Michael found himself driving to the accident site, now marked by a small memorial of flowers and candles. He knelt on the asphalt where Sarah had lain, touching the faded skid marks his car had left. The morning light revealed something he hadn't noticed before: a small unicorn keychain, probably from Sarah's backpack, half hidden in the gutter. As he held it, something broke inside him. Without calling his lawyer or consulting his father, Michael drove directly to the police station. Officer Parker found him waiting when he arrived for his shift. "I need to make a full confession," Michael said, his voice steady for the first time in weeks. "Not just about the accident, about everything." For the next 6 hours, Michael detailed years of corruption. He provided account numbers, dates, names. He explained how his father had groomed him from childhood to take over the family's web of influence. Sarah was right, he told the increasingly stunned officers. Power became our only truth. We forgot how to be human. Meanwhile, across town, Mayor Anderson was orchestrating a desperate counterattack. He called in favors from state officials, threatened local business owners, and tried to mobilize his remaining allies. But something had shifted in Millbrook's power dynamics. Each person who refused to help cited the same reason. "I saw something in Sarah's eyes. I can't go back to the darkness." The mayor's world unraveled further when his wife, Eleanor Anderson, publicly supported their son's confession. "I've watched power poison my family for 30 years, she declared to reporters gathered outside their mansion. "It's time for truth to heal us," she revealed how she had secretly documented years of illegal activities, hoping this day would come. Michael's confession extended beyond legal declarations. He visited Sarah in the hospital, expecting condemnation but finding compassion. "I've never felt real love before," he told her, tears streaming down his face. "Not until I saw it in you, the kind of love that wants truth more than comfort, healing more than power." The young lawyer's transformation became as much a topic of discussion as Sarah's miracle. People who had known him as the arrogant Prince of Millbrook watched in amazement as he worked to make amends. He volunteered at local charities, met with families his family had wronged, and used his legal training to help expose and correct years of institutional corruption. "It's like watching someone wake up from a long nightmare," Dr. Chen observed as she witnessed Michael's daily visits to the hospital chapel. He would sit there for hours, sometimes crying, sometimes praying, sometimes just sitting in contemplative silence. Father Michael noted how the man's designer suits gave way to simple clothes, his practiced charm replaced by genuine humility. The ripple effects spread through Millbrook's power structure. Other members of the Anderson Empire, inspired by Michael's courage, came forward with their own confessions. Long-buried evidence surfaced. Secret accounts were exposed. The carefully constructed hierarchy of influence began to crumble. Sarah watched it all unfold from her hospital bed, offering the same gentle wisdom to everyone who visited. "God's love doesn't just forgive us, it transforms us. But first we have to choose truth over comfort, courage over power." Michael's most profound moment came when he visited Jennifer Williams. He knelt before her, offering not just apologies but a complete commitment to making amends. "I can't undo what I did," he said, "but I can dedicate my life to ensuring it never happens again." Jennifer's forgiveness, freely given though not easily earned, became another miracle in a season of miracles. As the sun set on that transformative day, Michael sat alone in the hospital chapel. The weight of his confession had lifted something dark from his soul, replacing it with an unfamiliar feeling of peace. He thought about the years ahead, the legal consequences, the broken relationships, the long path of restitution. For the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid. Sarah had shown him that truth, however painful, was the only path to genuine freedom. Father Michael found him there and sat quietly beside him. After a long moment, the priest spoke. "Sarah told me to tell you something. She said, tell Michael that God isn't finished with him yet. The hardest part isn't telling the truth, it's living it every day afterward. But he won't have to do it alone." If this story of faith, redemption, and divine justice has touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us share more powerful stories that remind us of God's endless love and the miraculous ways He works in our lives. Join our community of believers. The backlash hit Millbrook like a storm. As Michael Anderson's confessions became public record, the carefully constructed facade of the town's prosperity began to crumble. State investigators descended on City Hall, federal agents combed through financial records, and reporters from national media outlets filled the local hotels. Jennifer Williams faced the darkest repercussions. Anonymous threats appeared in her mailbox. Her apartment's windows were broken twice. The "for rent" sign suddenly disappeared when she tried to find a new place to live. Even some church members, whose livelihoods depended on Anderson family businesses, began avoiding her at services. Sarah's school life became increasingly difficult. Though many students supported her, others, mainly children of families tied to the Anderson empire, turned against her. Notes with cruel messages appeared in her locker. During recess, some kids would chant "liar, liar" when teachers weren't looking. The principal, still loyal to the old power structure, suddenly found concerns with Sarah's academic performance. The hospital faced its own crisis. Major donors connected to the Anderson family withdrew their support. Dr. Chin received notice that her research funding had been canceled. The board of directors, largely appointed by Mayor Anderson, began discussing budget cuts that would primarily affect staff who had supported Sarah's story. Father Michael discovered his church's tax-exempt status was under review. The food bank program he ran suddenly lost its city permits. Even his Sunday sermons were scrutinized, with complaints filed about political content whenever he spoke about truth and justice. Officer Parker was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. His evidence about the accident disappeared from police storage. Fellow officers, afraid for their own jobs, began distancing themselves. His daughter's college scholarship, provided by an Anderson Family Foundation, was abruptly revoked. The town itself seemed to divide into shadow camps. Businesses that supported the truth found themselves facing surprise health inspections or permit problems. Those who stayed loyal to the Anderson family received mysterious advantages, rushed approvals, overlooked violations, sudden tax reassessments in their favor. Rachel Martinez's blog was hit with cyber attacks. Her parents' small restaurant received threatening letters from health inspectors. Former sources clammed up, afraid of losing their jobs or worse. Even her internet service became suspiciously unreliable. The pressure took its toll on Sarah. Though she maintained her peaceful demeanor, dark circles appeared under her eyes. She lost weight. At night, Jennifer would hear her daughter praying for those who were suffering because they chose to stand for truth. The hospital chapel, once a sanctuary, was closed for renovations. Prayer groups were forbidden to meet on hospital grounds due to safety concerns. Even the small garden, where patients found peace, was suddenly off limits for maintenance. Long-standing friendships fractured under the strain. People who had known each other for decades stopped speaking. Community events were canceled. The annual town festival, a tradition for generations, was postponed indefinitely due to security concerns. The local economy began to suffer. As state investigations widened, banks became hesitant to approve loans. Small businesses that had depended on Anderson family contracts faced closure. The promised River Heights development stalled, leaving a wasteland of half-finished construction. Michael Anderson, Jr., despite his confession, found himself caught between worlds. His former friends shunned him as a traitor. Many of those he had wronged still didn't trust him. His mother, supporting his choice for truth, was ostracized from her social circles. His father refused to speak to either of them. Yet through it all, Sarah's message continued to resonate with a persistent hope. God showed me that sometimes things have to break completely before they can be rebuilt stronger. Those words became a quiet rallying cry for those who chose to stand firm despite the growing darkness. The breaking point came on a rainy Wednesday evening, 6 weeks after Sarah's miracle. Jennifer Williams returned home to find an eviction notice on her door and all their belongings piled on the wet sidewalk. Her daughter's precious books, their family photos, even John's military medals, everything soaked and scattered by the rain. Sarah stood in the downpour trying to salvage her father's waterlogged Bible, its pages dissolving in her hands. For the first time since her heavenly encounter, tears mixed with raindrops on her face. "Mommy," she whispered, "why do people choose darkness when light is so beautiful?" The final blow had come from an unexpected source. Pastor Roberts, who had known the Williams family for years, had sided with the Anderson supporters. During Sunday's sermon, he had implied that Sarah's miracle was a fabrication, a child's attention-seeking fantasy that had disrupted the community's peace. Half the congregation had applauded his words. Dr. Chin found herself escorted from the hospital by security, her research confiscated, her medical credentials questioned. Father Michael was reassigned to a distant parish, his last sermon attended by only a handful of faithful. Officer Parker, still suspended, faced mounting legal fees fighting false accusations of evidence tampering. That night, Jennifer and Sarah found temporary shelter in Rachel Martinez's small apartment. As Sarah finally drifted off to sleep on a borrowed couch, the adults gathered in the kitchen, speaking in whispers about mounting debts, lost jobs, and dwindling options. Even the strongest supporters were beginning to wonder if the cost of truth was too high. The town itself seemed to sink into a deep depression. Shops closed early, streets empty before dark, and neighbors avoided eye contact. The Anderson machine had activated every lever of power, turning Millbrook into a pressure cooker of fear and suspicion. In the hospital, now under interim management loyal to the Anderson family, Sarah's medical records were mysteriously misplaced. Dr. Chin's careful documentation of the miracle vanished. New official records suggested a simple case of misdiagnosed vital signs, nothing more. Michael Anderson Jr., despite his attempts to make amends, found himself facing disbarment proceedings. His mother, Eleanor, was served with divorce papers and ordered to vacate the family mansion. Their bank accounts were frozen, their phones disconnected, their reputations systematically destroyed. The local media, firmly under Anderson control, began running stories questioning Sarah's mental health, suggesting she needed professional help to process her trauma. Child Protective Services received anonymous calls expressing concern about Jennifer's ability to care for her daughter. Even the weather seemed to reflect the town's darkest hour: endless rain, unseasonably cold, as if nature itself mourned the apparent triumph of corruption over truth. The few remaining lights of resistance flickered dangerously close to extinction. That night in Rachel's cramped apartment, Sarah had a nightmare, her first since the accident. She woke up screaming, describing visions of darkness swallowing Millbrook whole. Jennifer held her daughter, their roles momentarily reversed as Sarah sobbed like the child she still was. "Maybe we should leave town," Jennifer suggested quietly, stroking her daughter's hair. "Start fresh somewhere else around the room." Tired faces showed agreement. The fight seemed lost, the cost too high, the opposition too powerful. But Sarah, even in this darkest moment, remembered something from her time in heaven. "God showed me that night comes before dawn," she said, her voice small but steady. "He said the darkest hour is when we must hold on to faith the hardest." No one knew then that dawn was indeed coming to Millbrook, or that the very depths of their despair would set the stage for the most extraordinary turn of events yet. As Sarah finally drifted back to sleep, she whispered words that would prove prophetic: "God isn't finished with Millbrook yet." The turning point began with a seemingly small event. On a cold Thursday morning, Michael Anderson Jr. walked into the local TV station, bypassed security, and stepped directly in front of the cameras during the live morning news broadcast. Before anyone could stop him, he began speaking. "My name is Michael Anderson Jr.," he said, his voice trembling but clear, "and I need to tell the truth about what's happening in Millbrook." For the next 15 minutes, as producers frantically tried to cut the feed, Michael delivered the most extraordinary public confession the town had ever witnessed. He detailed everything, not just the accident and cover-up, but 3 generations of Anderson family corruption. He revealed account numbers, hidden documents, offshore holdings. He named names, cited dates, and exposed the intricate web of power that had held Millbrook in its grip for decades. Most importantly, he pulled out a small silver USB drive. "Everything I'm saying is documented here," he said, holding it up. "I've already uploaded it to multiple secure locations. Every threat, every bribe, every corrupt deal, including what's being done to Sarah Williams and her supporters right now." His voice broke as he mentioned Sarah's name. "That little girl died because of my cowardice, and when God sent her back with a message of truth, we tried to bury it under more lies." The station cut to commercial, but it was too late. The broadcast had streamed live on social media. Within hours, the video had gone viral, spreading far beyond Millbrook's borders. State police arrived to take custody of the evidence before it could disappear. FBI agents, already investigating the River Heights development, expanded their probe. Mayor Anderson, watching from his office, made one last desperate move. He called an emergency press conference, planning to discredit his son as mentally unstable. But as he stepped up to the podium, Eleanor Anderson walked in. She carried a thick folder of her own documentation, years of secret recordings, photographs, and financial records she had meticulously gathered. "I protected my son from truth for too long," she announced, her aristocratic composure finally cracking. "I won't make that mistake again." She proceeded to confirm and expand upon Michael's confessions, adding details only a mayor's wife would know. The cascade of truth became unstoppable. Long, silent victims of Anderson family corruption found their voices. City employees began coming forward with their own evidence. The hospital board members who had supported the cover-up suddenly faced investigations into their own financial dealings. But the most powerful moment came when Michael visited Sarah, who was still staying at Rachel's apartment. He knelt before her, pulling out the small unicorn keychain he had found at the accident site. "I kept this as a reminder of my shame," he said, "but you showed me it could be a symbol of redemption instead." Sarah, with the wisdom that had marked her since her return, took his hand. "God showed me your heart that day in heaven," she said softly. "He cried for you, Michael. Not because of what you did, but because of what fear and power had done to you. He never gave up on you." As Michael broke down in tears, Jennifer Williams did something extraordinary. She hugged him. This simple act of forgiveness, witnessed by others in the apartment, became as powerful as any evidence. Photos of the moment, shared on social media, showed the real miracle: love overcoming hatred, truth defeating fear. The national media descended on Millbrook. The story had everything: corruption, miracles, redemption, a brave child, a prodigal son. But they found themselves reporting on something deeper than scandal. They discovered a story about transformation, about a town rediscovering its soul. Michael's confession had broken the dam, but it was his visible transformation that truly moved people. He used his legal training to help those his family had wronged. He voluntarily surrendered his assets to create a restitution fund. Most importantly, he showed genuine remorse, not through words, but through actions. The USB drive's contents proved even more explosive than the initial confession. It revealed connections to state officials, federal contracts, international money laundering. The Anderson empire hadn't just corrupted Millbrook, it had tentacles reaching into state capitals and beyond. By sunset, federal agents had sealed off City Hall. The mayor's office computers were being confiscated. Police chiefs in 3 counties faced indictments. The truth Sarah had died to reveal was finally fully emerging into the light. The transformation of Millbrook unfolded like a flower opening to the sun. Within days of Michael's public confession, the power structure that had dominated the town for generations crumbled. Mayor Anderson resigned, along with half the city council. The police chief was placed on administrative leave. The hospital board underwent a complete restructuring. But the real changes happened at a deeper level. People began speaking openly about their experiences under Anderson family rule. Shop owners shared stories of extortion disguised as protection. Teachers revealed how they'd been pressured to change grades for favored families. City workers described years of being forced to ignore safety violations and environmental hazards. Dr. Chin was reinstated with full honors. Her research not only returned but granted additional funding. The new hospital administration, led by a respected doctor from Boston, asked her to establish a research center dedicated to studying cases of miraculous healing. "Sarah's case may be unique," Dr. Chin said at the opening, "but its lessons about hope and healing are universal." Father Michael returned to his parish, welcomed by a congregation that had finally found its voice. The church became a center for community healing, hosting meetings where people could share their stories and begin the process of reconciliation. The food bank reopened, larger than before, supported by donations from reformed Anderson business associates seeking to make amends. Officer Parker was not only reinstated but promoted to lead a new anti-corruption task force. His first act was to rehire Rachel Martinez as the department's public information officer, recognizing that transparency would be crucial in rebuilding public trust. His daughter's college scholarship was restored, now funded by a community trust rather than Anderson money. Jennifer Williams received multiple job offers but chose to return to the hospital in a new role, patient advocate. Her experience had shown her how the powerless often suffered in silence, and she dedicated herself to ensuring every patient's voice would be heard. The hospital staff, from doctors to janitors, celebrated her return as a symbol of positive change. Sarah's school underwent its own transformation. The principal who had tried to discredit her resigned, replaced by M.S. Roberts, Sarah's former science teacher. The new administration established a truth and kindness program, inspired by Sarah's example. Students who had once bullied her became some of her strongest supporters, touched by her consistent response of love to their cruelty. The Anderson Mansion was converted into a community center, its ornate rooms now hosting support groups, youth programs, and civic meetings. Eleanor Anderson, finally free from her gilded cage, became one of its most dedicated volunteers. True wealth, she often said, lies in healing, not hoarding. Local businesses, no longer constrained by Anderson family control, formed a new merchants association dedicated to ethical practices and community support. The annual town festival was reinstated, now celebrating unity and transparency rather than power and privilege. Even the River Heights development was redesigned with community input, transformed from a luxury enclave into mixed-income housing with green spaces and community gardens. The media spotlight on Millbrook attracted attention from anti-corruption activists nationwide. The town became a case study in community renewal. Experts noted how the combination of moral courage, public confession, and collective healing had created a model for other communities struggling with systemic corruption. Michael Anderson, Jr., though facing legal consequences for his past actions, found a new purpose. He began working with advocacy groups, sharing his story as a cautionary tale about the corrupting influence of power and the liberating force of truth. His genuine remorse and active restitution efforts earned him, if not forgiveness, at least respect. Most remarkably, the social divisions that had long defined Millbrook began to heal. The invisible line between east and west sides blurred as people focused on rebuilding their community together. Church congregations that had been informally segregated by wealth and status began to truly integrate. Children from different backgrounds played together in the new community center, unaware they were helping to erase generations of social barriers. Sarah watched it all unfold with the same peaceful wisdom that had marked her return from heaven. "God showed me that healing isn't just about fixing what's broken," she told a gathering at the community center. "It's about building something better in its place." The transformation wasn't perfect or complete. Deep wounds take time to heal, and trust, once broken, rebuilds slowly. But something fundamental had shifted in Millbrook's spiritual DNA. The town had rediscovered its soul, guided by the divine wisdom spoken through a child's pure heart. On the first anniversary of Sarah's miracle, Millbrook gathered for a celebration unlike any in its history. The town square, once dominated by symbols of Anderson family power, had been transformed into a garden of remembrance. At its center stood a simple fountain where water flowed over inscribed words, "Truth and love, the light that heals." Sarah, now 10 years old, stood beside the fountain in a white dress, her presence still carrying that peculiar mixture of childlike innocence and divine wisdom. The past year had changed her too, not diminishing her miracle, but deepening it. She had grown taller, stronger, yet maintained that otherworldly peace in her eyes that touched everyone who met her. Jennifer Williams, dressed in her new hospital administrator uniform, watched her daughter with quiet pride. Her journey from cleaning staff to patient advocacy director had become a symbol of Millbrook's transformation. The hospital, under new leadership, had established the Williams Foundation, dedicated to ensuring healthcare access for all community members regardless of their social status. Michael Anderson, Jr., recently released from his reduced sentence and wearing a simple gray suit, sat among the crowd rather than on the stage. His testimony had helped convict his father and several state officials, but more importantly, his continued dedication to making amends had helped heal the town. He now ran a small legal clinic providing free services to those his family had once exploited. The ceremony began with Father Michael blessing the fountain. The priest's voice carried across the square as he spoke of death and rebirth, not just Sarah's physical miracle, but the spiritual rebirth of an entire community. Behind him, the various religious leaders of Millbrook stood together, their presence reflecting the new spirit of unity that had replaced old divisions. Dr. Chen presented her completed research on Sarah's case, published in major medical journals. While science couldn't explain the physical miracle, the documented evidence of Sarah's impossible recovery had opened new discussions about the intersection of faith and medicine. The hospital's new research center had become a place where healing was studied in all its forms: physical, emotional, and spiritual. Officer Parker, now Police Commissioner Parker, spoke about the new era of transparency in law enforcement. His anti-corruption task force had become a model for other communities, and his daughter, attending college on a community-funded scholarship, was studying public policy to continue the work of reform. Rachel Martinez, her blog now transformed into a successful local news site dedicated to investigative journalism, documented the ceremony with the same dedication to truth that had helped expose the original corruption. Her coverage would reach far beyond Millbrook, continuing to inspire other communities facing similar challenges. Eleanor Anderson's speech moved many to tears. She spoke of transformation, her own journey from privileged blindness to painful awareness, from shame to purpose. The community center she now ran in the former Anderson mansion had become a haven for healing and reconciliation, its programs helping to bridge the social divides that had once seemed unbridgeable. But the most powerful moment came when Sarah spoke. She didn't talk about the accident or the miracle or even the corruption. Instead, she spoke about love, the kind of love that transforms, that heals, that rebuilds. "God showed me that love isn't just a feeling," she said, her clear voice carrying across the silent crowd. "It's a choice we make every day, in small ways and big ones." She spoke of the grocery store owner who now kept a free food shelf, the teachers who volunteered after school, the former Anderson employees who had chosen truth over security. She mentioned Michael's daily work at the legal clinic, her mother's advocacy for patients, Dr. Chen's dedication to understanding miracles, both scientific and spiritual. "The real miracle," Sarah concluded, "isn't that I came back from heaven. The real miracle is that a little bit of heaven came back with me and you all helped it grow." The celebration continued into the evening, but with a character distinctly different from the old Anderson-era town events. Instead of showcasing power and privilege, it highlighted community and connection. Children played together regardless of their parents' social status. Former adversaries shared meals and conversations. Music and laughter filled the square that had once echoed with whispered fears. As the sun set over Millbrook, casting a golden light across the new fountain, Sarah stood watching the water flow. The inscription caught the light: truth and love, the light that heals. Her near-death experience had opened a door, but it was the community's collective choice to walk through it that had truly transformed the town. 5 years after Sarah's miracle, Millbrook had become a case study in community transformation. Researchers from universities across the country came to study what they called the Millbrook model of social healing and civic renewal. But for those who lived through it, the changes went far deeper than any academic analysis could capture. The Sarah Williams Scholarship Fund, established with recovered Anderson assets, had sent dozens of West Side students to college. Many returned to Millbrook, bringing new ideas and energy to their hometown. The old divisions between East and West gradually dissolved as mixed-income housing developments replaced the stark geographical separation of wealth. Michael Anderson, Jr., though still carrying the weight of his past, had found purpose in running the town's largest legal aid clinic. He worked tirelessly to help those his family had once exploited, living modestly and donating most of his inheritance to community causes. His mother, Eleanor, had become a beloved figure at the community center, where her gentle guidance helped heal old wounds and build new bridges. The hospital where Jennifer now served as executive director of patient advocacy had become a national model for compassionate care. Dr. Chen's research center attracted medical professionals interested in studying the intersection of spiritual and physical healing. Though Sarah's case remained unique, the principles of holistic care and human dignity that emerged from it transformed countless lives. Father Michael's interfaith healing ministry drew people from all backgrounds. The old barriers between churches dissolved as congregations focused on serving the community together. The annual Sarah's Light festival became a celebration of unity, drawing visitors from around the world who sought to understand how a town had transformed tragedy into triumph. Sarah herself, now a teenager, retained the spiritual wisdom that had marked her return while growing into a remarkably grounded young woman. She split her time between normal teenage activities and speaking to groups about her experience, always emphasizing that the real miracle was not her revival but the community's awakening to love and truth. The Williams Foundation, established to promote transparency and social justice, helped other towns identify and address systemic corruption. Rachel Martinez's investigative journalism network trained reporters in ethical storytelling and community engagement. Officer Parker's police reform programs were adopted by departments nationwide. Perhaps the most profound change was in the daily life of Millbrook itself. The culture of fear and favor trading had been replaced by one of mutual support and open dialogue. When new challenges arose, the community faced them together, drawing on the hard-learned lessons of their transformation. The old Anderson Mansion, now a thriving community center, hosted regular truth and reconciliation meetings where people shared their stories and worked through lingering hurts. These sessions, though sometimes painful, helped ensure that the healing reached every corner of town life. Mayor Thompson, elected on a platform of transparency and inclusion, made it a priority to preserve the lessons of the past while building for the future. A small museum in the town hall documented both the corruption and the transformation, ensuring future generations would understand the price of silence and the power of truth. Jennifer and Sarah still lived in their modest apartment, though they could have afforded better. "This is where our journey began," Jennifer would say. Their home became an unofficial gathering place for those seeking hope or healing, with Sarah's peaceful presence continuing to touch lives in quiet ways. On clear nights, Sarah could often be found in the hospital chapel where her journey began, speaking with visitors or sitting in contemplative silence. "God didn't just give me a second chance at life," she would tell those who asked about her experience. "He gave all of us a chance to see what love can really do." The fountain in the town square became a symbol of Millbrook's transformation. People would gather there to reflect, to remember, and to remind themselves of the choice they had made as a community to embrace truth and love over power and fear. As Sarah prepared to graduate high school, she wrote a letter to her community that captured the lasting impact of those extraordinary events. "Heaven showed me that miracles aren't just about breaking the laws of nature. They're about breaking down the walls we build around our hearts. Every time someone chooses truth over lies, love over fear, forgiveness over revenge, that's a miracle too. And those are the miracles that truly change the world." If this story of faith, miracles, and redemption has touched your heart, please take a moment to support our team by subscribing to our channel. Share this video with your loved ones who might need a reminder of God's endless love and power. Hit the like button and let us know in the comments how Sarah's journey affected you. Would you like to hear what happens next in Sarah's life as she grows up and continues to spread God's message? Your engagement helps us create more inspiring content that reminds us all of the transformative power of faith and love.